Okay, so this is going to be a presentation that is pre-recorded. It's going to be around the current situation where the vast majority of us don't have any access to a gym since they're closed due to the coronavirus situation. The lighting in this room is awful, but I'll leave myself up here in the corner, but you won't probably be able to make out anything other than my yellow t-shirt. So the title of today's talk is Detraining and Return to Training, How Best to Handle During and After the Lockdown as a Lifter. So this talk is aimed at strength athletes. So whether you're a powerlifter, weightlifter, strongman, or CrossFitter, you should be able to take away something from this talk. Even if you're not one of the above, you should still be able to take away some things from this talk around how to develop and maintain muscular size and strength when you have limited to no equipment. So this talk is aimed at people who have very little or no equipment. So you should be able to take away outcomes and practical learnings from this talk that are going to be relevant to you regardless of your situation. So if you have literally a flat with one room and your body weight, you should still be able to take away something from this talk. All right, let's start. Okay, so we are going to cover the basic adaptation. So the basic theory behind the training process. So stress and adaptation, what happens when we do it. We're not going to go into any real granular physiological stuff, but we will cover the basic theory. It's important so you can understand what happens when you train and recover from it, so you have a better framework around your thinking. We're going to talk around the detraining process, so the reverse of the basic adaptation process. What happens when you stop training and just when you're sedentary? What actually happens physically? And again, we're going to go into a bit more granular detail on that. We'll cover some of the timescales and some of the relevant science on that, so you have an idea of what you can expect to happen if you were to completely stop training during this lockdown. Then what we can do to mitigate the process, so actual specific strategies that we can undertake over the next period of time to keep hold of strength, to build size, and to keep our training interesting so that our adherence is high. So a big problem during this process is going to be motivation and adherence to training. So we'll talk around that, some stuff we can do to try and improve that situation. We're going to talk around how we can turn this to our advantage. So that's going to be included during the mitigation of the process, how we can come out of this situation potentially in a better place than when we entered it. So when we go back to training, we can actually start making progress pretty quickly, pretty rapidly. And then how we can best manage the return to training. So how we can go from basically not having access to a gym, not having access to bars, etc., and weights, and how we can go back to training in a sensible way that is going to negate or reduce the chance of injury. So we go from 0 to 100 when we go back training, chances are we're probably going to hurt ourselves. Okay, so the basic framework from which all training is derived comes from, we have three models from which we understand the training process. The first is general adaptation syndrome, which was brought forward in the 1950s, and it basically states a biological system has three phases when represented with an external or internal stressor. You get the alarm phase when basically the body or the organism recognizes that there's a stress or there's a change in the equilibrium. There is then the resistance phase, so that's when they adapt to the stressor, whatever that stressor is. That's the second phase. And then eventually when the stressor becomes too much and we can't adapt to it anymore, we get the exhaustion phase. So in the terms of training, the stressor is basically training. The resistance phase is when we adapt to the training. So once we went under that training stress, the training session, the training week, the resistance phase is when our body adapts to that process and we gain muscle strength, muscle size, fitness, or whatever the specific training adaptation to the stress presented is. And then the exhaustion phase in terms of training is when we don't have sufficient recovery, don't have sufficient time to recover, and we end up in a state of overreach and eventually a state of overtraining and injury. So that this principle has been adapted into first the supercompensation theory, which is a Soviet concept that was presented in the 80s or 70s or 80s, can't remember specifically. And it basically states we undergo an exercise stress or load. We lose fitness for a period of time. So after a strength session, we might become weaker due to fatigue. And then after enough time has passed, we get a jump in fitness, which is known as supercompensation. And that's when we notice an increase in fitness or strength. There are other adaptations to this, the fitness fatigue theory, which is a two model factor. So fitness fatigue takes into account the fatigue. So not only that we have fitness, which is your current state of readiness. We have performance and we have fatigue. So fatigue is basically how tired you are. Fitness is your current readiness, your ability to display that, or how trained you are. And then performance is basically your ability to display your fitness. So for lifting, powerlifting, strongman, it's your ability to display your strength. And for something like an 800-meter runner, it's your ability to run around the 800-meter track maximally. And for the times that you present are your performance. So if we look at this in the guise of a runner, during your high load training blocks, your running times, maximal running times might be reduced because you're under fatigue, but that fatigue necessitates your fitness. So for fitness to be high, fatigue needs to be high. Basically, for you to be fit, you need to be training. And the more training we can reduce while managing the fatigue levels, the fitter we become. So the better our potential is. So when we're in our high load training phase, we are increasing our potential to display a fast 800-meter running time. Then when we come into competition, we reduce the training load to allow a reduction in training volume, the reduction in training load, the reduction in training volume allows for a drop in fatigue. That drop in fatigue allows for an increased level of performance, even though our fitness may have dropped. So that's the three-factor theory, or the two-factor theory, the fitness fatigue theory, that was presented in the 90s or the early 2000s. And here you can see the graph of the fitness fatigue theory. So training stress basically creates punctuated equilibrium. Basically, your body, if you let your body be, it'll kind of like it'll come towards a state of equilibrium, or it will come. It did a terrible job of representing this. Your body wants to stay in homeostasis. It wants to stay the same. Presenting a specific stress to the body, such as a strength training session or a fitness training session, punctuates that equilibrium. So for your body to be able to stay in a state of homeostasis, to be able to stay the same, it needs to be ready for the same exposure. So after a training session, whether it's a fitness session or a strength session or whatever the training stress was, your body will adapt towards that stress. So the next time that you present your body with a similar or lesser amount of stress, it should be able to cope with it and maintain homeostasis better. So that's basically how we conceptualize fitness training and how we manipulate the kind of stressors. Just so you have an understanding, even if it was poorly explained, of the kind of the gross thought that goes behind training, and how when we can't present our body with exercise stressors anymore, when we can't train for, we can't powerlift, we can't weightlift, we can't train for implements a strongman, we can't do CrossFit, how this lack of stress is going to affect our body. So we'll talk about the detraining process. So detraining is not necessarily a bad thing, and it is something that we utilize in the training process for recovery and the balance of fatigue. So we can use detraining deliberately in the training process for deloads. That allows us to avoid overuse injury. It gives tissues time to remodel and recover. And it allows us to balance the training load over a long time frame. If we try and stress the body all the time in training, we exponentially increase the opportunity for overload related injuries, tendonitis, tendinopathies, and eventually torn ligaments, torn tendons, torn muscles, broken limbs, if you're unfortunate enough to experience one of those. So deloads, planned periods of detraining, known as deloads, are necessary in training to manage those risk factors. So as I already kind of discussed in the example of the 800-meter runner, we can also use deliberate periods of detraining to peak. So a deliberate reduction in training volume over a period of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, depending on the sport, can allow us to have an acute spike in performance that we can utilize to increase our ability to perform due to the reduced level of fatigue. But it also means that we have reduced the amount of fitness. So if you go through like a peaking program and then you come out the other end, so you go through the volume, the overreach, the taper, and then the peak. Out the back end of the peak, if you try and jump into your program beforehand, either the volumes you were handling or the loads you were handling, you're going to be in for a bad time because your fitness has dropped off due to the taper process. We deliberately allow the body to drop in fitness so we get that drop of fatigue, so our performance potential is raised acutely for a small period of time to allow us to do better in important competitions. We can use periods of detraining to allow for physical and mental respite from high load periods or long competitive periods. So in a seasonal sport such as rugby or football, there are periods of time called off seasons where we allow athletes and players deliberately to go away for 3 weeks, 6 weeks to engage in reduced training load, even for a couple of weeks, completely negated training loads, to experience a more varied training environment and just to go away from the team environment, to go away from the competitive environment, to allow them to recover mentally from the stressors and also physically from the stressors. There's a lot of like niggles that people will carry, such as in powerlifting training, you might have a rotator cuff niggle, but if you have a competition coming up, you'll just adapt your training around it. You'll try and you'll reduce your resistance, you may reduce your volume, but you're still going to try and train towards adaptation because you have a competition coming up. But once the competition is removed, there's then an opportunity for a period of detraining around the specific training. So like bench press, we can stop training so hard for bench, maybe take up more of a maintenance or even allow a regression in strength and fitness in the bench press to deal with the underlying injury or the underlying niggle, to allow in the long term. That's the better strategy than to try and just keep improving specific fitness, improving performance in the event, because that's going to lead to overload injury, and in the long term, losing 5 to 6 months for an overload injury is not a good bet versus losing a month or two of bench press progress to allow yourself the time to deal with whatever overload related injury or niggle that you're dealing with. So that's some deliberate detraining in some aspects of the program are better trade-offs for the long-term performance, also for off-season breaks. It's not really something that happens a lot in powerlifting. We are not too sure about like weightlifting at an elite level. I think strongman's probably better for it because I think they're from what I can see anyway in the professional circuit, they have a reasonable flow to their year. There's a chunk of time in the year when there's not a lot of competitions, whereas powerlifting tends to be kind of an annual process. The only real time that where we have like low levels of competitions in powerlifting is kind of December, typically speaking. So it's not really something that we utilize so much in powerlifting. I don't know about CrossFit or weightlifting, but typically the paradigm within strength sports is you train hard pretty much year round. So when people say off season, they typically just mean they're doing like high volume training with less specificity, which is not really what we'd understand in other sports. Typically off season is an elongated period of detraining and definite deliberate detraining of specific adaptation. So yeah, we can also use periods of detraining of specific adaptations, kind of what we were talking about beforehand. So within powerlifting, we might take a period where we do more volume-based training or hypertrophy-based training to allow us to work on our specific fitness, our work capacity, and our muscle size, because this is going to allow us to do better in subsequent blocks. So phase potentiation or block potentiation is a concept which is utilized quite a lot within planning of training. If we do a period of strength endurance, it increases our performance in a strength block. So that's something that we can utilize in our training. So when we specify strength endurance and hypertrophy, we deliberately go away from trying to push our 1 rep max strength, because after a period of strength endurance and a period of hypertrophy based training, our potential for the next exposure to strength stimulus is greater. So we can get stronger over the long period if we take time away to work on strength endurance and hypertrophy specifically. And also technical factors, but we're not going to go into that just now. Okay, so that's a general kind of look at kind of the general theory behind stress and adaptation. Some look around how we use detraining in the planning of training. And if we look at, so this is just a little talk about the S.A.I.D principle, so specific adaptation to imposed demands. Basically, this says that we are going to adapt specifically to the training stress we represent. So if we do a squat training block, it is unlikely that our bench press is going to go up if we don't train the upper body. We might get some kind of systematic or global increase in size due to elevated testosterone or some other mechanisms have been hypothesized but haven't been borne out during the literature. So there was some stuff doing the rounds maybe 15 years ago that compound lifts such as deadlifts and squats increases systemic testosterone, so then led to greater increases in muscle mass. But these have been shown to not really be true, or at least there hasn't been much supporting evidence for them. So doing compound lifts like squats and deadlifts are going to make us better at squats and deadlifts. They're also going to increase our vertical force production. They have other benefits, but to take advantage of those benefits. So for our squat, so for example, if we train squats to become stronger in the squatting movement pattern, for us to be able to jump higher, we need to be doing jump training alongside of that to take advantage of the increased force capacity that we have. We need to turn maximum force production or maximum force capacity into rate of force development or power. So for us to become more powerful, we need to do power training. So it's not really enough to do kind of like this kind of training and magically expect there to be another outcome. if we want to get better at something, we need to specifically train towards that. And what this means, and the reason that we're talking about this in this talk, is our specific training outcomes. So to become better at squat, bench, deadlift, to become better at snatch, clean and jerk, to become better at stone, log, axle, to get better at thrusters, wall balls, standard wads. We need to be training those specifically. We can train capacities. So what we're going to talk about in this talk and what we're going to be training towards is muscle size. So we can make muscles bigger. A bigger cross-sectional area of a muscle has a higher force capacity. Doesn't mean it's going to be stronger, but it has the capacity to be stronger. So if we have a larger muscle and then train it for size, then train it for strength, the chances are we're going to end up with a stronger muscle than if we just trained for size and didn't get bigger. And we can train work capacity and fitness so that we can recover better from training. So we have a larger training capacity when we go back. So if we have a larger training capacity, we can put in more time and effort. We can do more meaningful sets during the week, and we can adapt from it. Then chances are we're going to get stronger. So we're going to look at developing some kind of aerobic element to our training. And then for our force, we can work our force capacity in a general sense. So we can do ballistic training, isometric training to try and help to hold on to some force characteristics in the planes of motion that we do. So squatting, plane of motion is vertical. Deadlift's kind of more of a horizontal lift, although it is vertical. But the outcomes from the plyometric training are horizontal. For that, relating to hamstrings, glutes, the muscles involved in deadlifting. And for bench press, we can obviously do press ups pretty easily. So basically, in the roundabout ways, what we're kind of talking about there, when we can't take advantage of the S.A.I.D principle, we need to work on physical capacities, which is kind of what we just talked about. So what is detraining? So detraining is a training principle. It's known as reversibility. Reversibility means that an athlete can lose the effects of training when they stop, and they can gain the effects when they begin to train again. Detraining occurs within a relatively short period of time for an athlete to cease training. Performance reductions may occur in as little as 2 weeks or sooner, and this depends on the physical characteristic, and we'll go into that in more depth. So a principle that you'll hear or a saying that you'll hear quite a lot is use it or lose it. So this basically comes from the reversibility principle. So for example, if we go from a period of heavy training, when we have competitions coming up, when we go away from that heavy training and focus more on capacities, fitness, hypertrophy, technique, the whole nine, we lose the efficiency that we have gained. So we get worse at lifting 90% and above. The only real way to get better, to improve at lifting 90% and above, is to lift 90% and above. So again, the S.A.I.D principle is very important. So this means that we are going to lose specific fitness during this time. It's unavoidable. So we shouldn't be scared of that fact. It's happening whether you like it or not. So the question is, how do I keep training towards my specific goal of being better at squat, bench, and deadlift, snatch, clean and jerk, strongman implements, the whole nine? The question is not how do I mimic my training with the implements that I have, because that's ridiculous. We're not trying to mimic specific training because we can't. What we're going to do is we're going to train capacities the best we can. So we're going to utilize training modalities that are going to better achieve the goals we want than trying to do some half-assed training and trying to mimic like a back squat or some shit. So we're not going to do that. We're going to try and train fitness components, fitness capacities that are relevant to the outcomes that we want, utilizing the best tools we have available. Okay, so basically, this is just a bit of talk. So for us to adapt to training stress, first of all, it needs to present the stress. So there is damage done to the muscle, bone, ligament, tendons. Those, so like I refer to this as the mechanical factors of training. So when we do a heavy squat workout or we're under systemic heavy squat loading, we are breaking down quadriceps. We're causing micro tears to quadriceps. We are causing micro traumas to bone. We are causing micro traumas to ligaments and tendons. And with enough time and enough raw material, calories, protein, sleep, the body remodels those tissues using like inflammation pathways. There's a whole host of metabolic signaling that goes on within the body to allow satellite or stem cells to then um, attach onto the cell. So the easy example is hypertrophy. So when I cause micro trauma to a sarcomere, which is a muscle spindle, there's a inflammation response to that. And then there's a whole bunch of different hormones, like IGF-1 factor like growth hormone, and there's a whole bunch. I can't remember half of them, but there's basically a cascade of cellular cellular signaling that goes on, and there's stem cells called satellite cells that kind of hang around the sarcomere. Basically, signals for those to attach on to the damaged cell, and then they can either create a larger cell, so that's cell a cell hypertrophy, or they can create another cell that's hyperplasia. And typically within mammalian muscle, the preferred response, or what seems to be the preferred response, is hypertrophy. If you look at the same kind of process in birds, there seems to be a bigger preference for hyperplasia, and that's due to calcium signaling and stuff like that I remember from school. So that's kind of like a little kind of example of what happens within mechanical factors within muscle. Now, if we look at the neurological factors, these are your ability to recruit high threshold motor fibers faster, your coordination, both inter and intramuscular coordination, so you're able to co-contract better. So if I want to contract forcefully at the quadricep, I need to silence the hamstrings. So you have you have agonist and antagonist pairings within the muscle. So biceps, triceps, quadricep, hamstring are the easy examples of that. If I was to try and jump, or if I was to try and squat a 1 rep max during the extension phase, I need to fire my quadriceps as hard as I can. If my hamstrings aren't silenced, if my hamstrings don't relax, then there's the potential to snap your femur or to snap your the bone, basically. If both pairings, if the hamstrings and the quads try to act forcefully together, there's potential for injury, potential for damage there. So the better you are at silencing the agonist or the antagonist muscle, the better the agonist can act. So that's an example of one of the kind of intramuscular coordination factors within lifting. But basically, when we get exposed to producing maximal force, or when we get exposed to a certain training stimulus, the body gets better at this. So we get better at the movement, we get more efficient at the movement, but we also get more efficient at using what we have. So when a beginner starts the training process, it's not necessarily increases in cross-sectional area or increases in muscle size that make them stronger. They basically just get better at lifting heavy things in the plane of motions that they're training, and that's down to coordination factors, your ability to utilize the muscle mass that you have, and your ability to coordinate the body to do so. It costs a lot in terms of what you could call energy and capital. So protein needs to be utilized to repair cells. Collagen needs to be utilized to repair cells. We need to expend energy, so we need the chemical reactions, oxidation, we need to create ATP. We need to create we need energy for these cellular and metabolic processes to take place. So that costs the body resources, recovery time, energy. The body is built for efficiency. So basically, if the body doesn't need to make these adaptations, or if the body can get away without this metabolically active tissue, such as muscle mass, bone density, the whole nine, your body will basically utilize. So if you've been powerlifting, or you've been strongman training, or you've been sprint training, or whatever, and you've hypertrophied the muscles of the legs, you have a higher bone mineral density. The quality of your tendons is higher because you have a better collagen content. When you stop training, your body's going to recognize, or the lack of stress, the absence of that stress, your body will utilize those proteins and those tissues for repair elsewhere in the body where it's required. So you'll lose that adaptation if you don't use it, because your body is a homeostasis machine, like we said. So if your body doesn't require the adaptation to stay in a state of homeostasis, it's going to catabolize that tissue. And also the neural pathways they recede with the lack of use. So when we do skills, or we do skill training, we create bonds within the brain, and those bonds get stronger with training and practice. However, when we stop doing the training, those bonds recess. They don't disappear. That's why someone who is previously skilled at something can pick it up a lot easier than someone who's like creating new skills, new pathways. But if we stop the training process, our skill recedes. So that's kind of the whole process we talked about, is the process of adaptation, the process of gaining new skills, gaining new muscle, gaining new tissue. To maintain your skill level, to maintain your size, to maintain your strength, to maintain the adaptive tissues, the adaptive skills that you've gained from training, it takes a lot less exposure to the stimulus to maintain than it does to gain. So for example, if we go into a state of calorie deficit where we're trying to lose body fat, for us to maintain our lean tissue, our muscle mass, we basically need to provide the body with enough protein in the diet, so your body has an abundance of protein, so it can use it for cell repair and the rest, so it doesn't have to catabolize the muscle. And we have to provide the body with some adaptive stress, some stimulus to the muscle mass, so your body still thinks it needs it. So your body will prioritize adipose tissue. It will take away from its stores of fat for energy rather than catabolizing muscle for energy, because you have the training stress there, and your body is more likely to take away from its energy store than it is from its muscle mass. Your body wants to hold on to adipose tissue. Energy store is very important for survival. So you need to make it worthwhile to your body for it to catabolize fat rather than to catabolize muscle or metabolically active tissue. If you look at it, it kind of makes sense. If you're in a deficit, and you can either get rid of some, so let's say let's say it's financial deficit, right? Because we're all in one of those right now. Let's say we have so much money in our bank account, so that's our adipose tissue, our storage, and we have something like, maybe you're paying for Netflix, right? So that's constant. That's a demand. So it takes £8 a month to keep your Netflix, or you can take that £8 out of your savings account. So you can make the decision. You can either get rid of the Netflix account and do without, or you can take it out of your savings. So that's kind of what that's the decision your body's making when you're in a calorie deficit and you're trying to lose fat. You need to make it worthwhile to take it out of the savings. So in this scenario, when we're all stuck at home, you might want to keep the Netflix because it's keeping you sane. Whereas getting rid of £8 of the savings and the balance is maybe worth it rather than taking £8 or cancelling the Netflix and doing without. Maybe it makes more sense to do without the £8 in your savings account versus utilizing the access or the utility of the Netflix account. And your body's kind of the same thing. If your body has muscle mass and you're doing weight training or you're doing strength training, then your body is probably more inclined to take it out of adipose tissue than to take it out of the muscle mass, as long as it's being exposed to stressors that require that tissue on a regular basis. So, but the amount of stress, the amount of training required to hold on to adaptation is much less than the amount of training required to induce more adaptation, something we'll cover in a bit. Okay, so this is I was trying to find some better metrics on this, but there's not really a lot out there. So is it better kind of bro science, but it gives us an idea of what happens when we detrain. So this is complete inactivity. So after a couple of days of not training, mood can be affected negatively. After 3 to 5 days, you start to lose aerobic capacity. You start to lose speed. Starts to be negatively affected after 3 to 5 days of detraining. Basically, you can lose a bit of sharpness. Aerobic drops off a bit more after day 7 to 9. Day 10, you start to lose a bit of muscle mass. Day 11 to 13, your cardiac output drops more. This is bullshit. Muscle tone sees first appreciable loss. Actually, no, that's not bullshit. Basically, this is not terribly accurate, to be honest, but it kind of conceptualizes what happens during the detraining phase. Basically, the first attribute that you're going to lose is going to be speed-related attributes, rate of force production-related attributes. You're then going to lose some specific aerobic or some specific fitness. So for weight training, your weightlifting fitness will drop off pretty quickly. So within 2 weeks, you'll see a drop in your lifting fitness. So when people have taken 2 weeks off a holiday and then come back to the gym and they're like, holy fuck, I've lost all my strength. You haven't actually lost your strength. Your force capacity is still the same. It's just that the specific anaerobic and glycolytical fitness adaptations you've made have dropped off in those 2 weeks. When we go out towards 3 weeks, 4 weeks, so day 30, day 27 to day 30, that's when you're going to start to see drops in aerobic fitness and you're going to see drops in muscular strength. So this is after total detraining. So if I just don't do anything, after a month, I'm going to start to see drops in my muscular strength. And my specific fitness will start dropping off after 7 to 14 days. Oh dear. that's the Rona. That's the Rona. R.I.P. in peace. So basically, you're going to see drops in power and reinforced development within the first week. You'll see drops in specific fitness attributes, so your ability to get under a barbell, do a set, and recover afterwards. All will be negatively affected after 2 weeks. And you're going to start seeing drops in muscle mass, drops in strength after 3 to 4 weeks of detraining, doing nothing. So we look at some actual science in this. I did look for quite a while. There's not a lot of good studies out there on specific training populations. There is some here and there. This was probably the best study I found. It basically was done on elite rugby and American football players, looking at the gains they can make in season, but also more importantly for us, looking at the loss in physical fitness after periods of detraining. So basically, they showed that there was, on average, a decrease of 14.5% in strength and power during detraining periods of around 7 weeks. So if you detrain, so if you stop training for 7 weeks, plus or minus 5 weeks, so there's quite a big standard deviation on the mean. You can look, you're gonna lose about 15% of your strength and your power. So if we do detrain, we're going to see if we do nothing, we will see an appreciable language is difficult for me. We will see a meaningful decrease in our performance, our ability to display strength and power. Here's some blood flow restriction, which is occlusion training, something we'll talk about as a specific strategy we can utilize to maintain our training qualities. We can see pre and post training, and we can see the decreases in strength, both isometric and dynamic. So isometrics are our ability to push against a static object, to hold a maximal contraction, and our dynamic strength is our ability to actually move the weight. So an example of isometric strength would be squatting up into a squat rack that's bolted into the floor, our ability to push into the floor as hard as we can. And then our dynamic strength in the same scenario is our 1 rep max back squat. So after 6 weeks of detraining, we can see, so the pre and post, so we have 3 stages to the study. We have pre, before NH training, we have post, which is after 6 weeks of training, and then we have after 6 weeks of detraining. So we can see after 6 weeks of detraining, there is a decrease in isometric strength. There's a decrease in isometric or in dynamic strength. There is a decrease in mass on all measurements, but it is still higher than pre. So although after 6 weeks, which is kind of around the time scale we're at now from when this lockdown started, we can see there is a decrease in fitness, there's a decrease in strength, there's a decrease in size, but it's still higher than when you started. So we're not going to end up kind of where you started. You're going to lose some strength, you'll lose some size, but you're still going to be bigger and stronger than when you started training, thankfully. Here's some more data, although I'm not entirely sure the validity or the usefulness of this data. You can basically see in weightlifters the effects of 12 weeks detraining. So basically, we have the start here, percent increase versus the start. And then after 4 weeks of detraining, this would suggest that the majority of the strength loss has already occurred, and they're kind of holding a baseline after about 6 weeks of detraining, or 4 weeks of detraining, whatever the time frame is there. It's kind of hard to make out because it's fucking potato quality. And then we have another one here with 3 different cohorts. So we have physically active males, physically active females, and strength athletes. So this would suggest that those who have been exposed to strength training before, so probably most of the people watching this video, were more susceptible to a drop in training load of 2 weeks than people who are maybe physically active but don't strength train specifically. This data might even suggest that some people can get stronger in those 2 weeks. So after 10.5 weeks of training, 2 weeks of detraining, this is as a percentage change. So the strength athletes didn't see too much of a gain. They've seen a more appreciable drop. But if we're to believe the data to the left here, it would suggest that after 4 weeks, we're probably going to hold the line for a while. So here's some data by the Glute guy on strength maintenance. So this was 16 weeks of 3 times a week strength training, followed by 32 weeks of detraining. They're split into 3 groups. We have those on a 3rd dose of training, those on a 9th dose, and those who don't train at all. And we can see on the right here their trajectory. So those who detrained, they seen a drop below baseline. Those who trained a 3rd, they actually seen an improvement for the first the first 16 weeks. They seen further improvement, and after a further 16 weeks, I guess, they seen an eventual decrease on that peak. Those who did a 9th, they fell to a level, and then eventually, after the first 16 weeks, that now presented a training stress due to the drop of fitness, and they kind of returned to where they were. Again, one study, don't want to read in too much into the specifics of it. Like, we can't say this is going to be your trajectory for your strength and your hypertrophy training, but we can use it to bring out a general trend. That is, if we train, we're going to maintain, basically. And a 1/3 of our training dose from beforehand might be enough to hold on to most of what we got, or even a 9th we'll hold on to some of what we got. So if you're training 5 days a week with weights, you're doing 90 minutes, 2 hours, even doing 2 or 3 20-minute sessions that are targeted and difficult could be enough to hold on to muscle mass, could be enough to hold on to some force characteristics. So when we get back in the gym, we're actually going to be able to start training meaningfully again pretty quickly. And if we follow the kind of trajectory that I'm going to be talking about, you should actually be able to hit the ground running pretty quickly and get into some PBs or some meaningful training, some training designed are towards performance, increasing your performance pretty much from the get. Okay, so let's talk more about the actual specifics of what we can achieve during this time. So during this phase of training, we need to be looking at these physiological outcomes. Maintenance of force output. Realistically, we're probably not going to be able to increase our force output, our maximal force capacity, because we don't have sufficient external load, but we should be able to maintain certainly some of the force characteristics we have. We can actually look to gain size. We can look to increase cross-sectional area with enough dose. And we should be looking to improve our general conditioning. So when we do a phase of tens or a phase of volume, we are improving our aerobic fitness, we're improving our specific fitness, we're improving the size of the muscle, and we're improving body composition. That's the goal of volume training, strength endurance, hypertrophy training, are these outcomes. So these are outcomes that we can actually engage in, although not with the tools that we would normally utilize. Adherence to training and motivation is going to be a massive struggle for a lot of people. I know even for me, who's got like a barbell, a rack, and weights, adherence to training, motivation for training has been a fucking grind. A lot of that is basically just showing up and doing the damn thing, regardless of how you feel, and just putting yourself in the position. So showing up. So have it scheduled Monday, 7 a.m., 12 a.m., whatever fucking time you're going to train. Here's the session I'm doing. Here's where I'm going to do it. Showing up and starting. That's basically it as regards adherence. You show up and start. I mean, there's going to be some days you can't be fucked. There's going to be some days the motivation is going to be down. But a lot of the adherence is just going to be fucking rocking up and being there on time, or just being there. And then if you train, you train. If you don't, you don't. If you're training shit, it's shit. If it's good, it's good. That's kind of by the by. A lot of the adherence is just going to be doing the damn things, just making time for it, scheduling it, having a place for it, and then showing up at the time, ready to go. Having a plan for the training, having goals for the training, having outcomes for the training, all things that we're going to kind of lay out how we're going to do that. And a big thing for lifters, and a big thing for kind of like longer term trainees in general is metrics and progress of those metrics. So for lifters, it's very easy. We can see how much we can squat, we can see how much we can bench, we can see how much we can curl, clean, snatch. We can see our grace times, we can see our 10K times. There's so many aspects of training that numbers really fucking help with adherence and motivation. So there are things we can utilize more to the conditioning aspect, or having kind of like having standard workouts, kind of like CrossFit have, would be an idea as well. So how many press ups can you do in a minute? How many pull ups can you do? How many handstand press ups can you do? What's your 2K running time? What's your 1200-meter running time? How far can you cycle in 10 minutes? Kind of like, it doesn't have to be anything specific. It just has to be able, it needs to be measurable and trackable, basically. And some of the issues we're going to have with some of the training modalities we're going to utilize is subjectively you'll feel, actually, that felt better, like that session felt easier. And that will be enough for the first 2 or 3 weeks. But then once we've adapted to the new training schedule, a lot of those kind of feelings of, I can feel better, I can feel myself getting better to every exposure. Eventually, the changes in performance are going to become noise from session to session. So having metrics, heart rate monitors, things like that is going to really help with adherence. So that's something that we should cook into the training. So have a few things, have a few goals that you can measure and track them. So, you know, body weight could be one if you want. You're like having a standard workout, like in a minute, how many body weight squats can I do? After a minute's break, how many pull-ups? After a minute's break, how many press-ups? After a minute's break, how many fucking burpees? Whatever the fuck you want to do. But have like measurable, have testing, have benchmark workouts, bake that into your training, because it will really, really help with your kind of long-term trajectory, your adherence, and your motivation for training. So we're going to talk about the aspects of training now, kind of briefly what they are, and what we can actually do to make an improvement or to make an impact on them. So the first one's force maintenance. So force improvement, realistically, is probably the one thing we can't train for without the equipment that we normally train with. It's also kind of the main goal. So here we have size principle. So basically, size principle states that the increased force demand put on the muscle, you'll innervate the larger fibers, the larger motor units. So we can basically we can basically engage the whole muscle with 3 methods. We can do a maximal lift, so a 1 rep max. We can move at a maximal pace, so sprinting, throwing, jumping. Those will all innervate the whole muscle. Or we can lift to failure, so we can induce enough fatigue, so we can fatigue the smaller motor units, and then when they can't produce force anymore because they're fatigued, we'll start recruiting the larger motor units until eventually we can't recruit any more motor units because we're fried and we've reached failure. So training the failure will recruit all the muscle mass in a muscle. Lifting at a maximal velocity will recruit all the muscle mass in a muscle, or a maximal output, such as a maximal isometric or a maximal 1 rep max effort, will recruit the muscle, all of the muscle that we have. So basically, for force production or force maintenance, there are 3 methods we can utilize. We can utilize an isometric, and we've got examples of all this that we'll watch. And I've just put these into squat, bench press, and deadlift for powerlifting. You can infer other ones for weightlifting. For weightlifting, vertical jumps going to be massively important. Vertical force production in weightlifting basically is weightlifting. So, like, if you just look at the squat the squat there for weightlifting, the tile hold isometric, vertical jump performance, and pistol squats where you're going to failure in a 4 to 10 rep range. Those 3 together on their own is quite a good strategy for maintenance of strength for weightlifters. So basically, we have three methods or three kinds of contractions. We have isometric contraction, which is maximal contraction against an immovable object, so holding the same joint angle, holding the same relationship, the same tension relationships to joints and muscles, contracting maximally against that, and we'll hold that between 10 to 30 seconds. Plyometric training, so ballistic training, so trying to jump as high as you can, trying to jump as far as you can, trying to run as fast as you can, trying to use your hands to lift you up as high as you can with a clap press up. And then isolation, so basically taking a muscular task where realistically with the external load that we have, which is our body weight and any kind of external load that we can gather, such as a backpack full of books, being able to utilize that to bring the muscle to failure. So we'll have a look at the squat interventions first. Some stage is always a fuck up, isn't it? So we have isometric hold, utilizing a towel. So basically, relevant to the squat with the heels. So basically, pulling up against the towel as hard as you can, pushing on the floor as hard as you can, doing that for 10 to 30 seconds. A plyometric version, or plyometric training we can utilize to mimic the squat pattern, vertical force production. It's just a good old-fashioned vertical jump. Basically, just with a counter movement, jumping as high as you can. That's ballistic extension of the quadriceps, of the ankle joint, the knee joint, and the hip joint together, trying to jump as high as you can. And then within isolation, something like a pistol squat. And again, depending on how good you are, so this pistol squat to a box is something pretty much everyone can do. But doing this weighted, it's realistically possible that with the kind of limited amount of weight that we have, maybe 10, 20, if you're looking up 30 or 40 kilos, we can bring the muscle towards failure in a 4 to 10 rep range. So those three in conjunction represent a pretty good strategy or exercise selection for maintenance of force production in a squat pattern. And then we have other suggestions for the upper body, for bench press, and then for the posterior chain with the deadlift. So we're just gonna bash on here rather than sitting and watching all those. I'll include a download link for the slides, so you can go ahead and have a look at those in your own time. View for that. I'll have to jump past all the crap. So training for size, basically, this is what we know with reasonable authority within training, and I've basically looked for systematic review and meta-analysis where possible to look for some consensus with the science. So basically, we can say the intensity of the exercise doesn't necessarily matter for hypertrophy, so size. So mechanical tension and metabolic stress are basically the two ways that we can induce the stress required for hypertrophy. Frequency of 2 times per week is better than 1 time per week. 3 times per week may be better than 2 times per week, but the evidence for that suggestion doesn't really exist. It seems to be that more volume is better, although there is a graded response. So more and more and more is not necessarily more. You need to do more within your ability to recover. As soon as you start doing more outwith of your ability to recover from the training, you basically start the process of overtraining, overreach, and overtraining. For tempos, time under tension, the evidence for that is limited. Basically, we can say if a contraction lasts for 0.5 to 8 seconds, it's going to produce adaptation, produce outcomes. As soon as we start going for 10 seconds and longer, we get inferior results versus 0.5 to 8 seconds. So just normal training. We can utilize some some tempos to make the contraction harder, but there's no point doing dumb shit like 5 seconds down, 5 seconds up. But we can utilize it for progression and utilize it for novelty, but shouldn't be a focus. And then eccentric and concentric muscle action both induce hypertrophy, so we should use both of them. So we can use some pauses. We can use some eccentric. We can do some eccentrics if you want. So like 3 seconds down, lift fast. You can basically do what you want within reason, but there's no real point focusing on purely eccentric or purely concentric muscle action because it's just overcomplicated. So 3 methods for hypertrophy training. Pre-fatigue. So basically, we take an exercise such as a bodyweight squat or a weighted squat and use it to pre-fatigue a muscle group, so we can use that to pre-fatigue the quads. So we could do, in our example here, we're using the chest, so we have a press up iso hold of 30 seconds. So pushing against the towel hard as you can, 30 seconds, take 30 seconds rest, and then chuck on a weight in your back, and then just do a press up to failure within a 10 to 20 rep range. So that we can utilize that kind of pre-fatigue. So we could use a bodyweight squat into a pistol squat. We could utilize banded RDLs or banded good mornings into Nordics to pre-fatigue that muscle group. So we basically take, because we have limited load, we use one exercise to pre-fatigue, and then we finish off on a harder, or we isolate the muscle and bring it to failure in that sense. We can use accumulation. So this is basically just kind of more volume is more. So pre-fatigue is training to failure, so that's going to be pretty stressful. That's something you might maybe do once a week. You can do it twice a week if you want. It's definitely not something I would be doing kind of 3 or 4 times a week. You kind of want 24 hours of rest after that kind of training. Accumulation is just basically doing sets and reps within a reasonable RPE band. So leaving 3 reps in the tank, leaving 2 reps in the tank, and focusing more on the execution of the skill. So like doing, for example, 5 sets of 8 press up with 2 reps left in the tank, or five sets of 8 to 10 press ups with 2 reps left in the tank. And we can focus more on the quality of it, so we can, relevant for bench press training, we can focus on cueing shoulders back and down, elbows tucked a bit, chest up, trying to replicate more, holding the scap together the whole time, and then producing a press up that kind of mimics more of a bench press skill, and just doing volume of that kind of work. That's going to help to induce hypertrophy. But it's something that we want to keep, because we're going to be utilizing something like pre-fatigue, which is pretty fatiguing or pretty stressful. We want to keep this pretty unstressful or less stressful, so we can recover from it. So I'd probably keep RPE 78, leaving 3 to 2 reps left in the tank. Enough stress so that it's going to represent something that your body has to recover from, but not so much stress that we're going to failure and inducing that kind of exponential increase in fatigue that failure brings. And then blood flow restriction. This is something we can do more because the mechanical stress is low. This creates metabolic stress. So basically, you put like a knee wrap, say, or a voodoo floss band kind of close to the body, so up on the thigh or up close to the arm, and then we do some pump training. So the protocol that we're suggesting here is 30 reps in the first set, 45 seconds off, 15 reps, 45 seconds off, 15 reps. And you basically keep doing that until you go to failure. Or for the first couple of weeks, you just kind of do that protocol. And what happens is it stops blood going to the muscle, but also stops blood coming out of the muscle. So you basically create a buildup of metabolites. The blood flow is reduced, so the metabolic stress in the muscle is greatly enhanced. So we basically can induce hypertrophy without inducing the muscular damage that we'll do with traditional training. So traditional weight training or kind of the pre-fatigue training, the accumulation training to a lesser degree are going to induce muscle damage. And that's the way that we're going to get bigger using that training. And whereas blood flow restriction or occlusion training just increases the metabolic stress, so we can utilize that more. Although it sucks, but you'll feel better the day afterwards. So if you do pre-fatigue and blood flow restriction, they're both gonna suck. They're both effective, but we can do more of the blood flow than we can the pre-fatigue. Although the pre-fatigue is going to represent a training stress that's closer to the normal training that we do, so kind of it's more similar to weight training. And then conditioning. So we want to utilize training that's actually designed for conditioning training. So for the harder sessions, so realistically, we don't really want to be doing maximum. So we don't want to be doing 90 to 100% heart rate training as a lifter, because it's not really going to help. We should be, for the harder sessions, should be looking to train kind of more of a 70 to kind of 85% maximum heart rate, and the lighter sessions, kind of the very light to light brand. So we basically want to separate out the green and the yellow training, so have 1 or 2 sessions like that, with the kind of the blue and the gray training, where they're kind of more based on recovery. So I'd say it depends on your training history. If you want to do, as a lifter anyway, you want to do maximum 2 conditioning sessions in a week, or hard conditioning sessions in a week, and you could do as much kind of like lighter recovery stuff as you want. So like you can go for a walk every day. It's not going to interfere. You can do yoga most days, as long as it's not like really tough. Or you can do Pilates pretty much most days, and it won't interfere with your ability to recover. It won't interfere with your training. In fact, it might enhance your training. It might enhance your recovery. We can do like the kind of the physio exercises. We can do that shit every day, and it's going to kind of reduce our weakness, improve our overall condition, so we can train harder when we do train. So eventually, it's going to lead to indirect performance improvements. When we're doing harder sessions, you want to use something like running, cycling, kettlebell training, or circuit training. Something that's designed, the cyclical, that we can do to get the heart rate up, that we can do basically under heavy amounts of fatigue without inducing or without increasing our risk of injury. So, for example, a poorly designed circuit would be squat snatch with box jump, because snatch is a high force, high velocity, high skill, and box jumps high velocity, high force. There is opportunity for injury in both of those exercises, and as we get more fatigued, our ability to produce high force, high demand, high skill reduces. As we get more fatigued, we become less skillful. We're not as fast. We're not as strong. Whereas something like kettlebell swings, fantastic. Low skill, low force, low power demand. Running, same. Like a jog is the same. Cycling's the same. Basic circuit stuff: press ups, burpees, push ups, bodyweight squats. Again, cyclical, low force, low skill. We can do them to get tired. And we want to be doing like a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio for that kind of training. So 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off. Or if you're a bit fitter, you might want to do 2-to-1. So 2 minutes on, 1 minute off. But basically, we want the net work rate to be high. So, for example, if I do, so for me, who's like physically not that well conditioned for endurance, if I was to do a workout where it was 2 minutes on, 30 seconds off, 2 minutes on, 30 seconds off, I might be able to do a pretty good output in the first 2 minutes. But as soon as I get that insufficient recovery, my output in set 3, set 4, set 5 is going to be dog shit, because I'm going to be gassed. Whereas if I get a 1-to-1 rest ratio, so 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, I can maintain a much better output over the session, because I'm getting sufficient recovery, and I can maintain a better quality of effort. So you're better served maintaining a quality of effort than making it harder by reducing the rest. Someone who is better recovered, or someone who is better adapted to that kind of training, they can do a higher work to rest ratio because they're fitter and they recover faster. So that's a way for them a way to progress it. For someone who is a bit fitter, you can keep the workload the same but reduce the recovery. And then the easier sessions, just eat simple shit like go out for a light cycle, go out for a light walk, do some yoga, do some Pilates, do some animal flow, kind of whatever floats your boat. So putting together a try hard training week. So basically we have 3 goals on the side. We have force production, which is relevant for strength athletes. We have size, we have conditioning, and we have play. So the ability to fuck around and do different shit is going to help with the current situation, because this kind of training, it's fine. Like you'll be able to do the training, you'll get something out of it. Physically, it's good, but mentally, it's like it depends if you like it or not. But having the opportunity for play to do some handstand training, to fuck around doing some weightlifting with a broomstick, to do some Pilates, do some yoga, do some kettlebell training, do some Joe Wicks. Like basically, it's an opportunity for you to do whatever the fuck you want, but it's still physically active, so you're gonna get some benefit from it. But basically, we're splitting up into a high stress day where we're doing the iso holds and the plyo training. We're doing the either accumulation or blood flow, and then we'll do some walking or yoga. The next day, we have like a moderate stress day where we can do our harder conditioning if we want. We can do the pre-fatigue training. So you probably, the way you'd structure this, you'd probably in the morning, you'd probably do your play if you're going to do it. So your gymnastics training or whatever, your pull, whatever the fuck you want to do, something that's like physical, it has a higher skill demand, and it's a bit more fun. And then you can maybe you could do a circuit after that if you want. You can go for a run, go for a bike if that's a goal, but you basically do your harder conditioning on this day, and then we do some more kind of size work. So we do our pre-fatigue kind of work, or you can do your blood flow restriction or whatever you want. But there's an opportunity there for another size day. Wednesday's a recovery day where we're basically doing no force reduction, no size. We could do some very light conditioning, and there's another opportunity for play if you want. Thursday, and we basically repeat that structure. So we have like a high day on Thursday, moderate day Friday, recovery day on Saturday, and then Sunday is just off. So yeah, so that's kind of like how you could put together like a try hard day. If you wanted to like hit all the notes that we're talking about, come out of this period holding on to your strength or your force production or as much as you can, putting on some size and being fitter, you can like, this is kind of a way you could put it together and maintain a high quality of effort in each aspect. But there's no need to be as try hard. Basically, the whole point is to do something. Even if all we do is 2 or 3 sporadic bodyweight sessions, but we're doing some kind of force production, we're doing some jump training, we're doing some isometric training, and we're doing like pre-fatigue or doing some occlusion. Basically, the more we can do, the better during this time. So even if it's only doing a couple of sessions, if they're half-assed or whatever, you're going to be in a much better position doing that than you will be from doing nothing. So when we come back, we're going to start rounding up now. So this is the chronic acute work ratio. So this is taken from Tim Gabbett's work in pro rugby. So the pro rugby schedule is like way and above what you're going to actually do as a lifter as regards training volume. So there's only a limited amount we can take from this probably. But basically we have 50% and below represents too little stress, too little training. So we're going to detrain and we're going to increase our risk of injury due to a lack of fitness. 1.5 times what you've done or what you're used to, twice what you're used to, we exponentially increase the risk of injury. So basically, if you do 5x5 squat, bench, deadlift 3 days a week, if you then go to doing 10x5 3 days a week, or 5x5 6 days a week, trying to maintain the same intensity, you're exponentially increasing the risk of injury. If you, from there, you drop down to 1x5 or 2x5 twice a week, you're going to increase your risk of injury through detraining. It doesn't work so well for lifting because lifting is cyclical. So the injuries are more tend to, or not more tend to be, they are overuse related. So certainly the logic of increasing your training volume twice, you're going to increase your risk of injury exponentially, certainly peters out. Although less exposures to lifting doesn't necessarily increase your risk of injury. But what it does do, however, and what's relevant for what we're talking about now is, so let's say before the pandemic, we're in the green zone, we're on one, right? You do what you normally do. But then pandemic hits, lockdown hits, can't go to the gym, you stop training, so you're under 0.5 of your workload. Then fuck all becomes the sweet spot. So now you sit around playing COD, whatever, doing fuck all, and then the gyms open up and you're like, oh, class, I can get back to my normal routine, and you jump straight into your normal routine. You're moving the red zone immediately, regardless of what you're doing, because you've done fuck all, you're completely detrained, you're out of shape, and then you move to trying to exercise 4 times a week, 5 times a week, doing your normal routine, whatever. The chance for overuse massively increases because your conditioning has dropped off loads. So we want to stay away. So the reason that we're trying to advocate the training that we've been advocating, and I'm trying to put some put some rationale behind it, actually make it relevant to the outcomes that we want as lifters. By performing that, even though it might be shite, you might not like it, it might not be engaging, what it is going to do is it puts us in a much better position when we get the go signal. When we get the go signal, we can get into our normal training routine and get back to it, rather than lying around, being a sad sack, doing fuck all. Go time comes, oh my god, amazing, 5 days a week, doing your normal routine. Week 3, you get a glute tendinopathy, you get a rotator cuff injury, and then you're fucked for like 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever. Basically, by doing something rather than nothing, and then hopefully doing something that's relevant to your outcomes, then you're going to be in a much better position when it comes to the go time, and we don't get hurt, and we can actually get back to doing what we want to do. So here's an example of a graded approach to reintroduction to training. So assuming that you train 4 to 5 times a week, for week 1, twice probably better, to be honest, maybe 3 times. You want to use about 50% of the volume that you're planning to use in your first phase of training, an intensity of RP67, 4 to 3 reps left in the tank, and you only want to do the core work and get the fuck out of there. So if you're a weightlifter, snatch, clean and jerk, squat, done. Powerlifter, squat, bench, dead, done. The next week, you maybe bring in some key assistance work. You increase the volume by about 10 to 20%. Frequency stays the same. Maybe you go from frequency of 2 week 1 to a frequency of 3 the next day. The intensity increases an RPE point, and we bring in some more variety. Week 3, we're practically back to full training. The RPE is kind of like a 7 more than an 8. Volume's pretty much thereabouts. Frequency's thereabouts, and we're doing a full program. So we're doing all the exercises we normally would, but maybe only doing 1 or 2 sets of assistance. So maybe we do like the full squat program, we do the full pause squat program, and then we maybe do some split squat, we maybe do some core, but we don't do the full load. And then by week 4, we're probably looking to start the intro week of whatever the next block of training is. So we should be starting the full training process then. So RPE, back up the normal volume, back up the normal frequency, and back on the full program. Okay, so that's going to complete this talk. Thank God. Thank you for sticking with me. Hopefully you've learned something. This is pre-recorded, as mentioned, so if you have any questions relevant to this talk, I'm going to put this up on YouTube and Facebook, so if you have any questions relevant for the talk, just drop them in the comments, and I'll get to them later. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.